We love this man so much. That's for you. So with that, we're honored to introduce you to Ted Bowman, the moderator of our symposium, who will introduce you to more of the aspects of the day and more about the symposium today. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you. Whew. I didn't expect that. Yes, I think I do. Yeah. Okay. Wow. 10th anniversary. I had hair back then. And we started all of this. It's wonderful to be here and just a treat and honor to be with you. May I ask you to turn to each other at your tables or neighboring tables and either wave or say, welcome, I'm glad you're here today. Would you turn and say that to one another? Some of you who've been with me before will know that that's the short version of the day in some respects. What I just asked you to do relates to some wisdom from Bob Vaninga, now a retired professor emeritus in the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota. And years ago in his book on hope, he said, those who get through a tragedy, those who get through a rough patch in their lives, those who deal with adversity well, point at least to one person who stood by them, supported them, and gave them a sense of hope. So at its best, it's what we call families. At its best, it's what we call the neighborhood. At its best, it's what we call the intersection of professionals and volunteers and clinicians and the families and the children. As Paul Wellstone said years ago, we all do better when we all do better. And so today we're going to be talking about how do we help each other to do better as a team, as all of those involved in the lives of children, adults, anyone, companion animals. We've even got some of them around here today. All the ways in which we try to work with each other around disruptive changes. And so not only will there be wisdom shared by our three guest speakers, we're so glad that they have agreed to join us here today, but I hope that you will tap into the wisdom of people at your table or at neighboring tables to have some conversations over lunch and in the breaks, and that we continue the conversations. This is not a conversation that's to be ended today. We're just putting a semicolon to be continued as we work with one another in whatever we might be doing. So let me give you just a bit of an overview of where we're heading. 3 years ago, Betty Davies used this interesting and haunting kind of metaphor that I'd not heard before of what she calls milieus of mattering. So today we're going to be talking about creating a milieu of mattering, and that is a setting, a culture, ambiance, a way of working that affirms that all involved, children, parents, volunteers, and staff, will engage in caring considerations for the ever-changing lives of children who live with complex medical conditions. The short version of that is it takes a team to create a milieu of mattering, that everybody is involved, everybody is engaged, and everyone is there to help whatever is happening, the good times and the tough times. How do we begin to move through those in some ways? So a colleague and I have been talking about these kinds of circles of ever-changing lives, especially for the children and the families, and have begun to put some materials together. Colette Fisher is a colleague of mine, a child psychologist in Denver, Colorado, and she and I have put this together. You'll look at the circles here, starting from the top. At the time of discovery or onset or birth, and then you move to the first diagnosis, the first assessment, the first news about something that this child might be living with, might be facing, the early understandings of that. What does this mean? For how long? What's the ongoing assessment? What's the future story? Moving then to crisis management in some cases, attentive stability, and then in many of the cases, especially for the children at Crescent Cove, knowing that this child is not going to have what we call a cure. And rather, we're talking about how do we care for and move from cure to care for children like these. If that's not enough, part of where we're going today is, even if you get through that first year, those months and so on, then there's what we call an exacerbation, another incident, something that is discovered. And so the cycle begins to go again from the exacerbation to a new assessment, adjusting both physical arrangements as well as medical and other arrangements. The next decisions, what do we do now? How do we move forth? Leading that to future decisions. What should we be anticipating? What do we need to be looking at for the future? Moving to a new tentative stability. As you heard Katie and Mary saying that some of the children come for respite care who are at a place of tentative stability. Some of them also will come from hospital care to have some tentative stability before going home. Again, and then chronic care. And Colette and I have even added, and I haven't put it in the slides here, even a third and fourth. Think about if we were to continue to show you these rounds of change. Of course, one of them leading and the days to come into hospice care and end-of-life care and all that goes with that. How do we sit with each other? How do we stand with each other? That's what we're going to be addressing today as people begin to address these kinds of matters. It's easier said than done because a lot of what the families are dealing with, what the clinical team is dealing with, what the volunteers are dealing with are situations of uncertainty and ambiguity. There's not clear clarity about what's going on. And so Pauline Boss and others have written eloquently about these losses that are unclear, confusing, and for which future stories and outcomes are unknown. And we're driven in both ways of trying to let the child think about the Crescent Cove motto, to live as fully as they can for as long as they can, make the moments count. That's part of the story, but also the everyday medical conditions, mental health conditions that the child and family are dealing with. And part of what we need to be aware of as we think about the families is as if this is the only crisis that this family might be going through at a time. But think about the other practical things that they're dealing with other siblings, perhaps, the financial issues, how do they modify the house in order to make this as comfortable as possible, on and on, all of the kinds of issues, the contextual issues that our families are facing. So the result of that, and again, part of the reason that this topic was chosen, is that the families then are dealing with an ongoing kind of ambiguity, ambivalence, perspectives, different perspectives coming from different voices, some regrets about things that they missed earlier or questions they didn't ask, some of the guilt, flashbacks, second-guessing, even family conflicts, and think about the conversations between the families and our clinical team and others as they are doing all of this work. How do we create that milieu of mattering where we can perhaps agree to disagree, but do it with as much care as possible as we explore what the options might be? So I'm trying to help you to shift gears from whatever was your morning routine to begin to consider some of the issues of our day. And what we're wanting to advocate, which we began even 10 years ago, and it's been a part of each of the symposia in some ways, is to move from either-or choices, black or white choices, clarity, to what we might call both and. And so for this symposium, the speakers and participants will address multiple changes, many of which will leave ambiguity about what is next. And so it's both and, not either or. And I just put up a few of the words that began to suggest that both and. There's more to me than the cancer. There's more to me than this condition, that condition. There's more to me than making the moments count, however long they may be. Seize those moments and to recognize, and we had that as a theme last year that all children have strengths and challenges and joy and discovery and competencies, but we often can get into reactive mode and only seeing the medical condition instead of seeing, as Lois will talk about in just a bit, the whole child, the full child. And so just a couple of more. This is a model that I hope many of you are aware of. Our Dutch colleagues, Strobe and Schutt, have put this together after their research, long-standing research around bereavement. And it seems to fit all the cultures of the world and even all of the ages of people that we need as we are facing these things to be able to oscillate between these two circles that you see there on the slides. That on the one side is there needs to be a time and place and a venue and a milieu to do some of the loss work, to face the grieving, to wail if you need to offload, to deal with all the fears and anxiety that might be part of that. That's part of the story. But to emphasize that that's not the only story, and that we also need that ability to oscillate to the other side, where there's restoration, where there's respite, where there's resiliency, where there's recovery, where there's doing some different things and trying even some new things, some discrete kinds of steps as we go along. So we want to be able to talk today about that oscillation between the various sides of our stories as we work with one another. And so we started with this, but we need to say it again. It takes a team. And so that's where we're going to be going today. I'm trying to give you the short version. I hope you don't take a nap now and miss these wonderful speakers that are following me, but rather that we can begin to let that be an introduction to what the day might bring. So take a pause, take a deep breath as we begin the symposium.